Hi, welcome to the bathtub. This is where you hear no theme songs, you see no glitz and glamour. This is the post-text. We're in the decade of the bathtub. We've given up all our fancy equipment and the whiteboard. It's just pure bathing pleasure. We don't do anything fancy. And I didn't even let Dodo out because she was driving me crazy the last time I did one of these videos. We're reading one of our things we're doing on this thing, whatever it is we call this thing, is we're thinking about reading through the complete Cormac McCarthy and seeing if we can read through all his novels and enjoy them before his two new novels come out. I think they come out in October and November. He must be in his 80s. He's a pretty old guy now. But they'll be important. They'll be his first novel since The Road. And a few weeks ago, we read The Orchard Keeper, which I liked more the second time I read it. I thought it was a little stiff in places, a little bit finding his way, but there's still some really good stuff in it. And this past few days, I reread The Outer Dark, which is his second novel. And I remember quite liking this the first time I read it. And it was originally came out in 1968. And I reread it. It's a kind of brilliant novel. I have to say, I do like McCarthy. I sometimes wonder if I do or not. This is interesting because it's kind of the whole McCarthy landscape kind of being built from the ground up in his narratives. I don't know anyone who writes these types of books. You can see the style from Faulkner, but the actual horrificness of the McCarthy universe and the comedy of that horrificness is very peculiar to him. I don't know anyone who writes like this. Outer Dark is definitely worth reading. I'm not going to talk too much because I don't want to tell you too much of the story, but like most of McCarthy, you have to kind of find your way in it. You don't get comfortable. I can't get comfortable anymore. It's it starts off. He reminds me. I think of him as kind of like I don't know if you remember Erskine Caldwell. He wasn't a very good writer. He wrote about kind of poor people in the backwoods, and they were always sleeping with their sisters and stuff. And they were kind of comic stories. And I remember reading some when I was a kid. They weren't very good, but or a little bit of like some of Steinbeck's stuff about kind of really poor people who are kind of kind of taking care of themselves and barely getting by. It's a much more nightmarish world, and a much more horrifically funny world. McCarthy's an incredibly funny writer. I don't know where it's the blackest humor I can possibly imagine. The setup of the book is the opening is a young man and woman who live somewhere in the middle of where is it, Appalachia? I'm just getting that from the back cover. Somewhere in Appalachia, in some really super poor area, like some shack somewhere. And in the beginning, the brother helps the girl give birth to a baby, and it's told in that same kind of McCarthy-esque kind of beautiful prose, and at the same time very visceral, and it's kind of a mix of naturalism and kind of just beautiful, weird, twisted prose. And this guy helps this girl have her baby, and then when she's passed out afterwards, he takes the baby and dumps it with a tinker. A tinker, I guess, is a guy who goes around and fixes people's pots and pans and helps them do things and sells them bits and bobs of stuff. And he leaves it with some old guy, and then he goes back to the sister. And what is clear about this point is that what becomes clear eventually is that the brother is the father of this girl's baby. He wants to get rid of it, and that's kind of the setup of it. There's also in the background the story of there's three men just kind of traveling through this world who are like the horsemen of the apocalypse. They're much less attractive than the horse less apocalypse, but there's just these three men who travel around the countryside just doing horrific things to people. It's a landscape basically of people suffering and waiting to die. That's basically McCarthy's picture of the universe: is everyone's suffering and eventually they're going to die horribly. And you would think that would not make for a good read, but it does, because he has a series of episodes after this. So the brother takes off, the girl takes off trying to find her baby, and the boy takes off trying to find her. And then we just basically have a kind of reverse Pilgrim's Progress, where the world is getting more and more nightmarish as these two pilgrims are going off into the woods trying to find this baby. And they're incredibly weird scenes, comic scenes. Eventually, often they'll be come across these people hanging from the trees that these three crazy gunmen have murdered and hung up in the trees. And there's one scene where the young man meets these three horrific people. It's a very funny, scary, suspenseful scene. I mean, you'll recognize some of it from the road where we kind of just travel, and the notion of being on the road and not really going anywhere is what seems to be the premise of this book, of the road, and almost every McCarthy book, is people aren't getting anywhere. And the girl's meeting a lot of strange characters along the way, trying to find this baby of hers. I'm going to read just a couple of random scenes, just because they're basically, once she meets these people, you kind of meet these people, and then you move on to another kind of weird, horrific scene. There's one point where I think I'll skip that one because there's 2 or 3 snake scenes. There's a guy who's a snake hunter that the young boy meets, or the young man meets, and the snake hunter says this. This is page 124. You know, snakes is supposed to be bad luck, he said, but they must have some good in them on account of them old Geechee snake doctors uses them all the time for medicine. Unless ye was to say that kind of doctrine was the devil's work, but the devil don't do doctrine, does he? That's where a preacher can't answer you, 'cause even a preacher won't say they can't help nor cure you. I've known 'em to slip off in the swamp theirselves for a little fixin' of something another when they wasn't nothing else in them poorly. Ain't you? I reckon, Holmes said. Holmes the boy. Sure, the old man said. Even a snake ain't all bad. They's put here for some purpose. I believe they's purpose to everything. Don't you believe that away? Later on, the same old man says this. It's a great line. I know things I ain't never studied. I know things I ain't never even thought of. It's a kind of a weird kind of, I guess I'd call it existential, this notion of these people with brains trying to understand the world and things going through their brains that they never really quite comprehend. That's always going on in McCarthy. These brains trying to understand the horrificness of the world around them, and they never quite do it. There's a scene after this where the same young man he meets a guy who's herding like thousands of hogs through some valley. And he meets the guy, he starts talking to the guy, and eventually, and suddenly the hogs go wild, and they start just running towards this cliff. It's one of those. It is definitely like a Hieronymus Bosch landscape of horror after horror, and they actually drive the herder off the cliff. the people who were with the guy come up and start blaming Holmes, saying you didn't help him. There was just like thousands of hogs pushing this guy. It's sounds outrageous. It sounds like it is a horror novel in a way. And at the same time, it's all told in this prose. It makes it feel like it's really, really happening to you. There was one other passage I wanted to read. This is the tinker. When the girl finally meets the tinker, and she's trying to get him to give her a baby, and the tinker says, "Hard people makes hard times. I've seen the meanness of humans till I don't know why God ain't put out the sun and gone away." That's another kind of McCarthy-esque hell landscape. And there's a number of passages in this about the road, about getting on the road and just following the road for no real reason. And that comes back to it basically ends with a passage talking about the home after there's the couple last scenes are two of the most horrific scenes I've ever read in fiction in a way. Be careful, so I would recommend the book if you can sort of accept that it is a fictional world that is horrible, fictional world. And at the end, Holmes is kind of going off, and he meets a blind man on the road. And he meets the blind man as he's going one direction. As he comes back, he meets the same blind man going down the other direction of the road. And it is McCarthy's whole vision, it seems to be, of human life, which is just blindly following some road, hoping to get somewhere. I know it sounds pretty hopeless, but it's very, very funny. It's a very funny book. It basically each scene is very different from every other scene. And when you meet these three horsemen of the apocalypse who show up 2 or 3 times in the book, those are awfully funny scenes as well. One's got a gun, one's kind of an idiot, and I think one has no name. I think he keeps talking about names, which in some really very funny dialogue. So I really recommend it. I'm enjoying reading McCarthy from the first 2 novels, and we'll see how far we get with it. But Outer Dark is a good one, and it's a good one to start with. It is a fable of apocalypse. It's a fable of the apocalypse. I don't know what else you could call it. Okay,